Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. US President Donald Trump signs a bill ending the longest government shutdown in the country's history. The House Speaker has scheduled a vote for next week on whether to release the full Epstein files. And the shapewear brand Skims, that's co-founded by Kim Kardashian, is valued at $5 billion. Now, US President Donald Trump has signed a bill ending the longest government shutdown in the country's history. It's been 43 days since the shutdown began, with thousands of federal employees working without pay, being furloughed or laid off. Let's go live to Washington now and speak to Republican strategist Adolfo Franco. Adolfo, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Okay, great to have you. The longest shutdown in US history has ended. The government is finally reopening. What was actually achieved over the 43 days other than economic pain for millions of Americans?
Well, excellent question. All that was achieved was economic pain and disruption of people's lives, particularly on air travel, and of course, federal workers whose pay has been significantly delayed. The reason I say this is because the proposal that was ultimately accepted to open the government is that there be a vote on the Obamacare subsidies, which was ostensibly the chief reason the Democrats shut down the government. That was offered by the Republicans 44 days ago. So the Democrats have now accepted the initial proposal. That's why there is so much anxiety and a civil war in the Democratic Party, because the largest bloc of Democrats, which are now on the left, are furious over centrists that agreed to reopen the government. So in essence, nothing was achieved in terms of what was the reason for the shutdown in the first place. There'll now be a vote in December on a Democrat proposal subject to amendments on the extension of Obamacare subsidies.
And let's talk a little bit about the Democrats. They caved, as you said, after not getting a subsidy to make healthcare cheaper for Americans. But have they won the shutdown because they made healthcare subsidies and the price of healthcare a talking point? And the poll showed Donald Trump's approval rating does remain low. And now, once again, people are asking the question about healthcare, and it seems to have really come into the fore after the shutdown.
Well, that's true, and there are some analysts who say maybe the Democrats lost the battle but have won the war. We have yet to see, because there will be a vote on Obamacare subsidies in December, and there is significant Republican support to either provide some of these subsidies or to reform the system. So we will see that the true test now to your question will be what happens in December. I do not believe the Obamacare subsidies are going to be rejected out of hand by Republicans, because prior to the shutdown, a number of Republicans in both the Senate and the House said something needs to be done with healthcare. So if the healthcare subsidies issues or reforms are achieved in December, then this issue will be long forgotten come next November when we have our midterms. If they're not, that will be an issue. There's no question about it, but there's a broader discussion as well. Why are we subsidizing Obamacare when, according to President Obama, it was going to be this program that was going to reduce cost and work perfectly well? Premium has gone up 60%, and the taxpayers who are not part of Obamacare are subsidizing this program. So yes, to answer your questions, they achieved making this an issue, but the issue could be resolved in a bipartisan way, potentially, in December. If it is not, it will be a battle as to whether this program was effective in the first place and whether taxpayers should be subsidizing it. And that will be the battle royal moving forward.
Yes, of course. Like you did say, many analysts are saying the Democrats have won when it comes to this in some respect. But let's talk about this latest bill. So it only provides funding to keep the government open until the 30th of January. So basically, this is a temporary measure. Also, the cost of living is the top concern for voters in the US right now, according to polling. So we're talking about the midterms. Is the Republican Party going to sort this out before the midterms, or are we likely to see another standoff?
Well, first, with respect to the standoff or potential standoff in January, three bills were incorporated, three appropriations bill. The government, the way that works in the U.S. isn't, so the viewers know, the whole government shuts down. The government is divided into 12 different appropriations bills, or 12 different, if you will, pieces of the pie. So three bills, including the agriculture bill, which is the food assistance program that was also an issue, those are funded through the end of the year. So those would be unaffected if there's another shutdown in January, as will a number of other bills that might be considered before January. So a large swath of the government will be fully funded for the remainder of the year. But there could still be a shutdown for the remaining unfunded programs in the government in January. It's a possibility. However, it will have to be over something that they allege. If we don't have a compromise on or a solution to the Obamacare issue, that is a potential for a repeat on that issue. But the affordability question is a different matter. That is something, it's a legitimate political issue, but it's something that you can't legislate affordability. That's just the economy. So it would be hard pressed to see how the Democrats could shut the government down over affordability issues unless they have some specific issue, which they have not raised to date. And I can't fathom what that would be. Politically, to answer your question, the affordability issue, as we saw in the November 4th elections here in several states, will be an issue in November of 26. And that will be depending on how the economy performs. And if it's not performing well, Republicans will pay a price. But that's not something that either party fully controls. Their policies do, but it takes a while for policies to actually influence the economic performance. So again, however the economy is performing in November of 26 will probably dictate the result of the election.
We'll have to wait and see for that. But I just want to ask you another question. While the Democrats are currently licking their wounds over the shutdown, did the Republican Party not want to reopen the government because of the release of more Epstein documents, which have raised new questions about Donald Trump's ties to him? A lot of people have been saying this was a reason, and we're seeing the likes of Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is a Republican, coming out and saying these files need to be released, breaking ranks with the MAGA movement.
Well, first, I don't believe the Republicans would have been happy to open the government or never had it closed, or open the government on day one, never had it closed, and deal with the Epstein file issue. For this reason, eventually, as we've seen, the government is now open. The Epstein file, you'd have to keep the government closed forever if you didn't want the Epstein file issue to be debated in Congress. So it's just a matter of time. And there was no pressing reason why we needed to, or a reason to delay the release either in November or December or so forth, meaning they're unrelated. The government, once the government opened this issue, as it has already surfaced, was going to be dealt with. And there are the votes. There's something called a discharge petition in the House, which means the majority of the House can override the leadership's ability to stop something from coming to the floor. And they certainly have the votes because they have all the Democratic votes and several Republican votes. There's only a 4-seat majority by the Republicans. So they will have the votes to release the Epstein files. But again, some of them, I think the most crucial ones have already been released. These files were in the hands of the Biden administration for 4 years. Have there been anything really a smoking gun, they would have released it, believe me. But I don't believe there is. You know how many stories on sensationalism and things regarding the private life of President Trump have been raised in the last 10 years, and he has survived them all. And I think he will survive this one as well. Whatever is in those files, and we've seen some of them, I think, again, are not going to damage the president long term.
As they call him, the Teflon president, Teflon Donald Trump, don't they?
That's
Adolfo.
correct.
Yeah, absolutely. Adolfo Franco, thank you so much for joining me this evening.
Leigh-Ann. Thank you.
Let's get into this further with Scott Lucas, Professor of US and International Politics at the Clinton Institute, University College Dublin. Scott, thank you so much for joining me. I just wonder if you could comment off the back there. I was obviously speaking to the Republican strategist Adolfo Franco ahead of you, and we were talking about the Epstein files and the release of more of them. What do you think? Do you think there's a link to the US shutdown and the release of these files?
Well, Mr. Franco was impressive with a lot of Republican talking points, including about the shutdown. Probably need to cut through those. What happened on the Epstein files is that while it was not directly linked to the shutdown, the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, used the excuse of the shutdown to refuse to administer the oath of office to a new representative. That's Adelita Grijalva of Arizona, who had been elected in September in a special election. So he, in effect, shut her out of Congress for 7 weeks. Why did he do that? Because as soon as she was sworn in, she would become the majority vote, the 218th vote on this discharge petition to bring this to the floor of the House next week. The Trumpists tried to use those 7 weeks to sway those 4 Republicans to not vote with the Democrats. So they tried to stonewall this issue. At the end of the day, they could not succeed. There were 4 Republicans who joined the Democrats. Johnson had to swear in Grijalva yesterday because the government had reopened. And so, yes, we will finally get a vote on the Epstein files in the House next week, despite the House Speaker, a Republican, trying to protect Donald Trump by preventing Representative Grijalva from being accepted into Congress.
So, Scott, let's go back to the shutdown now. Thank you so much for answering that question on Epstein there. But my big question to you is, why did the Democrats fold and agree to reopen the government? Because they appeared to have caved quite significantly.
You know, sometimes there are human elements which are here. For those 8 senators, Democrats 7 Democrats and independent who joined the Republicans, they were saying, look, the Trump administration was playing the scorched earth here. 700,000 federal employees who not only had been furloughed without pay, but who were being threatened with being fired. Another 700,000 working without pay. Food assistance for 40 million Americans completely stopped. Transport being snarled, especially air transport, because you couldn't get people to come into work without pay. So the American economy was in trouble, especially for those who really, really rely on the government for day-to-day support. And so those 8 senators said, look, we need to stop that pain. They did get a token concession to have this vote on the tax credits for Affordable Care Act in mid-December. If they do not get that vote, or if that vote does not succeed, then we'll be back at this point in January. But the difference in January will be that millions, tens of millions of Americans will have paid more than double their premiums on health insurance from November to January. That will put the Democrats in a stronger position if they tell the administration, no, we're not going to let you have another line of credit here because you are not dealing with health care.
And let's talk about the agreement has sharply divided the Democratic lawmakers, many of whom are accusing senators of surrendering to Trump, and the Republicans. Why are the Democrats so fragmented at the moment, even at a time when Donald Trump's approval rating does remain at 40%? Because the fact that some Democrats decided to reopen the government has really caused divisions within the party.
You get, sometimes politicians, whether they're Republican or Democrat, sometimes they actually really, really feel something. And the Democrats who wanted to continue the shutdown really felt that this healthcare issue needed to get resolution, because we're not just talking, and here I've got to deal with Mr. Franco's diversions. Here we're not just dealing with the doubling of premiums. We're dealing with Donald Trump, who says he wants to scrap the Affordable Care Act altogether. He's actually repeated that in the past week. And we know that there are many Republican legislators who want to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, which, as a reminder, extended health care to 40 million Americans who did not have it before. So the Democrats said, look, we just can't tolerate this. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there were some Democrats who said, look, we're not getting a resolution on this yet. We've got to cut the immediate cost of what's happening to the American economy and American people. But I think if this goes into January and the Trumpists have not done anything to compromise over health care, then I think the Democrats will be on a fairly firm line, because you mentioned the key point. The key point here is, even if you lose the battle and you do not get the tax credits at this point, you win the war, because it's not immigration, it's not Donald Trump's day-to-day tweets that are the concern of most Americans. It's healthcare and the economy. And going into the 2026 elections, that will favor the Democrats.
And that's really interesting, because when you do have a look at what Americans care about, you're completely right. It's the cost of living. It's the top concern there. And as we see, the shutdown, and as you've just explained to me, has caused so much pain for so many federal workers and people across the board. But, you know, we're talking here about the Democrats caving after not getting a guarantee to make healthcare cheaper. Health insurance subsidies for low-income Americans are set to expire at the end of the year. And we talk about this right now, but what does this mean for people, and how concerning is this, especially when it comes to how expensive healthcare is in America?
It more than doubles the premium. So it increases it more than 100%, whether you're an individual, whether you're a family. Now, if you're a well-off American, maybe you don't need any support, or maybe you can afford that increase. But if you're not so well off, you got a decision to make. You either have to pay that premium, stay insured, but you have to cut back on your expenses elsewhere. Do you cut back on heating? Do you cut back on housing costs? Do you cut back on food? Do you cut back on having vacations with your family? Or you choose to go without insurance altogether. And the problem here is precisely what we had, why the Affordable Care Act was brought in. You had 40 million Americans who didn't have insurance before 2011, 2012. And because they did not have that, hundreds of thousands of Americans were seriously ill or died because they weren't covered. Obamacare eased that. If you roll back Obamacare and you double the premiums, you put those Americans back at risk, irrespective of whether they're Democrats or Republicans.
Scott Lucas, it's always brilliant to get your views. Thank you so much for joining me. US House Speaker Mike Johnson has said lawmakers will vote on a bill next week on the full release of government files related to the late financier and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. It comes after House Republicans released over 20,000 new Epstein files and accused the Democrats of cherry-picking documents after they published emails which they said linked Trump to the disgraced financier. Here's what the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt had to say.
This administration has done more with respect to transparency when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein than any administration ever. In fact, this administration, the Department of Justice, has turned over tens of thousands of documents to the American people. We are cooperating and showing support for the House Oversight Committee. That's part of the reason you are seeing these documents that were released today, because of the House Oversight Committee's and Republicans' efforts to get these out to the public. This administration also moved, the Department of Justice also moved to unseal grand jury testimony, which we know, unfortunately, a judge declined those requests. So this administration has done more than any, and it just shows how this is truly a manufactured hoax by the Democrat Party. For now, they're talking about it all of a sudden because President Trump is in the Oval Office.
Let's get the latest from Washington and all the reaction with our correspondent who's there for us, Nick Harper. Nick, Right. How damaging are these emails for President Donald Trump? And what's the feeling on the ground in Washington where you are?
Yeah, Leigh-Ann, it's interesting. As we've been hearing from those last couple of speakers, two stories have collided here in Washington in the last 24 hours. The shutdown, which has now ended, and the Epstein saga, which is continuing. And I think that's the problem for Donald Trump, because here we are into Thursday, a day after the shutdown, and the headlines in the US are awash with Epstein rather than the shutdown, because the shutdown is done and dusted. That's been put to one side. Everyone is still speaking about Epstein. It is a problem that quite simply is not going away for the president. As we heard there, the White House says that the Democrats are cherry-picking some of those emails, some of those quotes, but some of them are potentially very damaging, including Epstein writing that Donald Trump knew about the girls, that he spent hours at Epstein's house with one of the victims, and Epstein also hinting that he had damaging information on the president that he said could take him down. All of that suggesting that Donald Trump knew more about Epstein, perhaps knew more about his lifestyle, perhaps even knew about his criminal activity. But of course, the president, throughout all of this, has strenuously denied not just any involvement, but also any knowledge of anything that was taking place. But undoubtedly, headlines have been captured. This is the talk of the town here in Washington today on Thursday.
And Nick, as you just said to me, the president has always denied any wrongdoing throughout. But what has been his response to these latest emails that have been released?
Well, as you'd imagine, he has weighed in. He's weighed in on social media and he has blamed the Democrats. He has gone on to say in a couple of different posts that the Democrats are using the Jeffrey Epstein hoax to try and deflect from their massive failures, in particular their most recent one, the shutdown. Of course, Donald Trump blamed the Democrats for that 43-day shutdown, the fact that they continued to block legislation passing through the Senate. Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, we heard from her just a moment ago, but she doubled down on this idea of the Democrats selectively choosing bits and pieces that she feels fits their narrative. She said that it was all about leaking emails to the liberal media to create a fake narrative to smear President Trump and distract from his historic accomplishments. She also said that one of the main accusers, Virginia Giuffre, never directly accused President Trump of any wrongdoing. But Lisa Bloom, a lawyer and an advocate who represents about 11 of the survivors, she has said that all of these emails, in her words, are legally significant because it is Jeffrey Epstein himself, she said, pointing a finger at Donald Trump.
And there's a vote next week which could see the release of all the files relating to Epstein. How likely is that to actually happen?
Well, look, this is the one thing, Leigh-Ann, that the president does not want to happen. Months ago, before he came into the White House, he promised a certain level of transparency, and he certainly seemed to be moving in that direction in the first few months. But since then, he has been very much against the release of all of these files. But the problem is that there are now enough lawmakers in the House of Representatives to force this vote and therefore force the hand of the Republican House Speaker, Mike Johnson. He has said that a vote will take place next week. The likelihood is that this vote will pass, and this vote would compel the Department of Justice to release all the files that they have pertaining to Jeffrey Epstein. But that's not quite the end of it, because then that would move on to the Senate. The Senate would need to pass it, but it's likely to face stiff opposition there. And even if the Senate did pass it, it would then move on to the president's desk, and he would need to sign off on the Department of Justice releasing those files. And the expectation is, because he doesn't want them released, that he would veto that. So essentially all of these files that have been leaking out, they wouldn't necessarily come out in one big exhaustive tranche from the Department of Justice just because of this vote next week in the House.
Nick Harper in Washington, thank you so much for joining us. Now to Southeast Asia, where Thailand and Cambodia are once again accusing each other of opening fire along stretches of their disputed border regions. The latest flare-up has reportedly left one soldier dead, with 4 others injured, and follows months of tensions along the Thai-Cambodian border. Jan David has sent us this report.
Urgency at this Cambodian hospital as medical workers rush to get this injured soldier to the capital for further treatment. Cambodia accuses Thailand of opening fire along the disputed border, killing 1 soldier and injuring 3 others.
I call on the Thai side to immediately cease the use of force against innocent Cambodian civilians in Prechan village and to refrain from any use of force in addressing border issue between our 2 countries.
It's the latest incident of a border dispute that has dominated Thai-Cambodian relations in recent months. In July, 5 days of fighting left at least 48 dead and displaced some 300,000 people. It was hoped that an enhanced ceasefire signed alongside US President Donald Trump in October could bring an end to the fighting. At the time, the US president promised the deal could save millions of lives.
Both countries are agreeing to cease all hostilities and work to build good neighborly relationships, which have already started.
But earlier this week, Bangkok halted the implementation of the deal, accusing Cambodia of laying landmines along its border, injuring 1 Thai soldier.
The losses of the soldiers from the Thai army is something that we cannot accept. The landmine found to be in Thai soil is something that we deem affecting Thai sovereignty.
Observers from the Association of Southeast Asian Nations have been dispatched to oversee the latest border spat. As tensions in the region rise, they hope both sides can once again come to a negotiated settlement. Jan David, Arabiya English.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. Hamas and Islamic Jihad have announced they will hand over the body of an Israeli hostage tonight that was recovered in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza. If completed, 3 hostages' remains will still be held in Gaza under the October ceasefire deal that previously saw 20 surviving hostages released in exchange for nearly 2,000 Palestinian prisoners. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has called for an immediate halt to weapons supplies to Sudan's rapid support forces, accusing the group of breaking ceasefire promises and prolonging the war. Speaking on the sidelines of a G7 meeting in Canada, Rubio also suggested the Trump administration would consider designating the RSF a foreign terrorist organization. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is urging European allies to overcome divisions on using frozen Russian assets. He says the funds are vital to keep Ukraine's economy and war effort alive. He warned that without new EU support, Kyiv's survival is at risk. Zelensky called on President Trump to set an example by using Russian assets frozen in the US, saying such a move could spur Europe to act. And a mother and a daughter claiming to be a fortune teller and a feng shui master have been charged with scamming almost $46 million from vulnerable Vietnamese victims in Australia. Police say the duo ran a highly sophisticated fraud and money laundering syndicate using predictions of sudden wealth to pressure victims into taking out loans. Now, the shapewear brand, co-founded by Kim Kardashian, Skims, has been valued at $5 billion. It comes after it raised $225 million in new funding from investors, which will go towards opening more shops around the world. The company also expects its sales to top $1 billion this year. For more on this, I'm joined from London by economist Laurie Laird. Laurie, great to have you on, and even better to be speaking to you about Kim Kardashian. What a great day.
Look, this is not my strongest topic. You know what a geek I am. So I hope you don't mind. I had to do some external research here. And honestly, everyone who I've spoken, and you can probably tell I'm not that fashionable either, but I've spoken to a number of friends who swear by the Skims brand, absolutely swear by it. And these are not sort of youngsters who slavishly follow the Kardashians. And what I'm hearing is the quality of some of these garments, and she's moved from shapewear into outerwear, the whole range of products. But people rave about these products, and it seems to be what they like is it's pretty good quality, reasonably priced, sort of out of the top end of mass market. But what my friends and colleagues seem to like so much is the range of colors, the range of sizes that are on offer from the line of shapewear that Kim Kardashian is peddling. Certainly, she started with a lot of brand recognition, but the quality itself, I guess not unlike Victoria Beckham, who was not thought of as a particularly talented designer, and then her seeing more and more of her collections, even the longstanding designers are saying, hey, wait a second, this is not a flash in the pan sort of thing. But the friends that I know that are buying Skims products absolutely rave about them. So it's not just the celebrity brand that's attached to these garments.
And you know what's so interesting? I must admit something. I haven't bought Skims, but the competition that she's up against, Aloe and Lululemon, is something that I would buy and do wear. But what I find pretty fascinating about this whole story, Laurie, is there's so much investor confidence in this brand, and also Skims' plan is to open more stores, which I found really interesting, especially in the economic climate.
Yeah, it's a really good point, because these are not fly-by-night investors who are putting money into this operation. We've got an arm of Goldman Sachs that was one of the biggest funders in this latest round. And what's happening is that Skims is not a publicly listed company. You can't buy shares in it on the stock market. So the people that have put money into it are investors like Goldman Sachs, a couple of other fairly big name investors. So to do this expansion that you mentioned, these physical stores, Kim Kardashian and her co-founder have gone back to investors and have said, look, this is a great product. We'd like to expand it. Can you give us more money? Goldman Sachs and a couple of others said, yeah, sure, not a problem. So the valuation of Skims right now is about $5 billion US, at least based on this latest amount of money that went in there. And by the way, that's worth more than Lululemon and Under Armour, which are roughly competitors, combined. And I would think, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that that valuation of $5 billion, to me, seems a little bit conservative. I mean, they're looking at net sales of over $1 billion a year. So the value of $5 billion is not in any way stretching things with those kinds of sales numbers. But yeah, they're expanding into physical stores. And let's go back to Lululemon. This may be a cautionary tale, because Lululemon listed on the stock exchange a couple of years ago, which is a great fanfare. Everybody loved the products. Although Lululemon, I think, is a little pricier than Skims. Lululemon did absolutely fine, but the shares over the past 2 years have fallen 60%, whether that's because there's more competition, whether it's, as you say, consumers have become a lot more cautious all over the world, sort of an open question. So the competition is out there, looking at a lot of people saying, okay, Skims doesn't necessarily have to go to the stock market now because they can get this private funding. And I think perhaps given Lululemon's experience, the longer that Skims can stay off the public markets, perhaps the better.
Interesting. So we won't see a Skims IPO anytime soon. I will take that from you. We'll wait and see. But let's turn to the UK now, and let's talk a little bit about this disappointing growth. How can Rachel Reeves escape the doom loop that they are seeing in the UK economy after this data we got out earlier?
Yeah, great question. And we saw second quarter GDP, gross domestic product, it expanded by 0.1%. That's a little bit worse than people were expecting. People were expecting 0.2%. But there is a little bit of distortion in these data. One of the big problems was that slowdown. In fact, that work stoppage at JLR, the car company that makes Land Rovers, they had that massive cyber attack and essentially shut down their assembly lines for the better part of a month. That caused car production in the UK to fall to its lowest level in 70 years, which is absolutely incredible. That meant industrial production, which is about 10% of GDP, fell about 2%. And so that pulled the whole number down. So the numbers are a little bit distorted. But go back to your initial question, and I'm so glad you asked it the way you did. What can Rachel Reeves do? I think that what she should do is, this sounds terrible, forgive me for this, she can stop talking, because every time she opens her mouth, it feels like she's trying out another fiscal plan. Okay, we may think about raising income taxes. We may think about reducing national insurance contributions, which is a tax simply on people who work rather than people's accumulated wealth. We're thinking about a fuel tax. We're thinking about this. This is happening almost every day. And there are two, and this is on top of these two very big fiscal events, a budget and then a spring statement that we have in the UK. And I think that the effect of this is to paralyze people, to paralyze consumers, to paralyze people in businesses in terms of making investment, because they simply don't know what the fiscal regime is going to look like. And in fact, in the second quarter, business investment fell by 0.3%. And I think that's a very clear signal that business is scared to invest because they don't know what's going on. The UK alone has these two big fiscal events a year. And I think to provide some kind of clarity going forward, Rachel Reeves, or if anyone succeeds her over the next couple of years, should stop talking, stop fiddling with the fiscal situation this frequently, because it doesn't give people any sort of certainty.
And it's really interesting that you say that, because I know that previous chancellors have kind of locked themselves in a dark room weeks before the budget happened. And it was pretty incredible that we saw Rachel Reeves make a statement at 8:15 in the morning that was quite difficult to read.
I mean, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was quite an amazing thing.
I was half asleep watching that, thinking, am I really seeing this? And not only did she make that very short, I cut you off, I'm just incensed about this. Not only did she make that statement at very short notice, the press called in, and this was clearly timed with to get onto the breakfast TV programming. Although I noticed that the BBC took simply the statement and then went on to the rest of their program, didn't take any Q&A. But she didn't really say anything. It seemed to be to pave the road a little bit for higher taxes, but there didn't seem to be any real reason. And the net result was simply to continue to increase confusion. There's a lot that's good about the UK. There really is. There's a reasonably coherent or a reasonably good investment story to tell here. What is holding people back is this variability of policy.
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots of truth to that. But I do think, in the defense of Rachel Reeves, she was trying to get ahead of all the headlines that keep on leaking out. And just before I let you go, we have been talking, the US government, it's reopening following a 6-week shutdown, its longest in history. But you know what was really interesting? The stock market mostly rose through the shutdown. Why? Why?
Yeah, we had, I know, I hate when you ask me this, I never have an answer. Not only did the Dow Jones hit a record yesterday, but the bond markets have also been performing pretty well. We haven't seen any sort of spike in borrowing rates, which is the rate that the U.S. has to pay to borrow money. And gosh, does it have to borrow a lot? I wish I had an answer for this. It very much feels like momentum rather than trading on anything fundamental, because you look at that shutdown, and it's really hard to find any degree of economic competence, at the helm of the U.S. government. Add to that we have had, for over a month, we have had no hard economic data. The people that collect and collate and publish data haven't been at work. So we don't have any real sense of where the economy was before the shutdown, much less whether there were contractions, whether there was any kind of serious harm during the shutdown. We still have not heard from the statistical leaders about when they will resume publishing data. We were supposed to have inflation data today, another set tomorrow. No word on if or when that will be published.
Laurie Led, it was brilliant to speak to you, and I'm grateful that we got the Kardashians in there. Thank you so much.
First time, right?
First time for everything. Thanks. A reminder of our top stories. US President Donald Trump signs a bill ending the longest government shutdown in the country's history. The House Speaker has scheduled a vote for next week on whether to release the full Epstein files. And the shapewear brand Skims, that's co-founded by Kim Kardashian, is valued at $5 billion. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Of course, follow us on X. Plus, we'll be back in a couple of hours' time with W News Extra. Goodbye. Thank you for watching.